Welcome to Tales from the 90s, your retro look back at all things 1990s. Make sure you fire up either your Super Nintendo or your Sega Genesis because the console wars are on. We're going back to 1993.
Wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street. Man, those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Now, full disclosure, I never got to have a Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis when it was out, like new, so yeah, it sucked. But going back and having each system later on and playing it and just doing research is really cool. This whole episode is not about Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. It's just these things were popular at the time. That's what we do here on the podcast. We talk about anything that was going on in pop culture at the time, just things that I think about. Somebody's calling me on my phone here. Spam call as usual. Didn't usually get those back in the 90s. And you certainly didn't get robocalls as much as you do today. I mean, I'm sure it happened, but anyway, we're getting off the rails and we ain't even started. We're going to look back this week. First of all, I want to talk about last week. Thanks to everyone for their feedback. Any bonus episodes coming up in the future I don't have scheduled right now. I will be doing with my wife about Christmas. I'm not exactly sure when it'll be out. We'll just be talking about Christmas memories. So also thinking about maybe doing a deep dive into different game systems in the future on a bonus episode. Just my experiences with them, not a history or anything. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there that I watch all the time that give great histories on these things. I'll just give my memories and things that I've played, but that's for future stuff. Right now, like I said, we're going back to 1993, February to be exact. I know February, Valentine's Day. I certainly didn't have a Valentine at that time. But, yeah, this time I was 9 years old. I had just turned 9 in December. And a really big period of change going on during this time. This was right after meeting the man known as Marky Foe. But before I get to that, got my hair cut recently. I want to talk about that. I was like terrified forever of haircuts because my mom was cutting my hair and accidentally got my ear with the scissors when I was like, I don't know, maybe 10, 11, and it like scarred me for life. The only reason I bring that up is because I was getting my hair cut and the one at Greg Clips got me with the clippers like almost in the same spot where my mom did. It's like, oh no, not this again. But anyway, during this time, like I said, we're going to talk about the meeting of Marky Foe. For those that don't know, Marky Foe was my stepdad. Someone my mom met while we were living in Mount Carmel in his apartments, which last week was before then. This is after then. I can't wait to talk about this. I talk about my first crush. I mentioned that last week. Speaking of Valentine's Day. No, we didn't have a Valentine's date. But, yeah, I can't remember. Pretty sure, I think Mom met him in a bar. But she started talking about this guy she was dating, and she's like, I want you guys to meet him. He looks like Hulk Hogan. And he comes over, and yeah, he's tall. He might be Hogan's height. And he was bald, but that's about the similarities ended there. So I'm not trying to talk. He's passed away, and I'm not trying to. Anything I say is all in fun, so nobody take any personal stuff seriously. I mean, that's what I've done with all experiences I've had, good and bad. I try to find humor in them, but he had this. It wasn't too long after they met that they moved in. Got along with him well at first, because I mean, usually all stepdads, there's a period at first, oh yeah, we like your kids, until years later when it's raining and you got them outside, their face in the dirt, calling it military time. But anyway, you remember that one, Josh? Grin and bear it. Anyway, yeah, he moved in and he had like, I have tons of hats now. As you can see, normally sometimes I'm wearing a hat. It won't always be the same one. I have a ton of hats, but he had like 50 or 60 hats on this like rack he had. He called the hat tree. And literally that's what I went for Halloween. Then like a year or two later as a hat tree. He put all his hats on me. One of probably the lamest Halloween costumes ever. I know there were people laughing at me forever about that. But he worked closer to where we would move in Norwood, so I guess, and he was a tractor trailer driver. He worked for L&B Liggett, or as we call L&B Bickett. He called biscuits Bickets. Don't forget, let me tell you guys about Lurch Dogs on another one, and the donation cup. A lot of these references only my brothers are gonna get. Sorry for everybody else. But anyway, we moved to Norwood, 5724 Section Avenue. The second to last house in Norwood before you would get to what's technically known as another neighborhood, and the street actually changes to Rhode Island. Like, it's weird. There's like a imaginary line where the city changes and the name of the street changes. But anyway, we moved into this house we were renting, and I was in 3rd grade at the time. I'd started 3rd grade in I think it's called Brantner Elementary in Mount Carmel. But I went to Norwood View during this time, and like I said, it was around the end of '92 we moved there, so we hadn't been there long. But yeah, just little house, and Travis was only, well, it was February. Travis was turning 1 this year. Yeah. And like I said, we moved in there, and it was just a weird story. I remember the day we were moving, like the night before, I had like violently ill, like so bad I had to go to the hospital. Is what I remember about that. It's probably my body telling me don't move, but like I had a choice. But like I said, I went to Norwood View in 3rd grade, and one of the things I remember the most about that time is just, and a lot of kids my age remember the books we got to read. And if you were a horror fan, you had all kinds of choices. But one of my favorite types of books that I don't see talked about as much often is Choose Your Own Adventure books. Man, those were great. If you don't know what Choose Your Own Adventures books are, they're these books where you start a story, and they're usually kids' stories too. I mean, Goosebumps, which I'll talk about in a little bit, has had their own. Please excuse the freaking sleep in my eyes. Keep wiping. But Goosebumps had a version of these, and I'm sure there's been others. But the Choose Your Own Adventure books were so unique. You'd start a story, and then, like it says, you'd get to. It was usually 2, but sometimes there was 3 or more choices. You know, you choose what to do next, and then whatever you choose determines how the story goes. And it doesn't just end there. You got more choices and more choices, and a lot of times you die in the story, even though it's a kid's book, so don't say you die. It's like you meet an untimely end, or you're never seen from again, or something like that. They don't just say, well, you're dead. But and then there's other endings you can get to where a good outcome happens. I wouldn't say you win because it's not a game, but man, those are so, I don't know how I read, but once I found those out in the library there at Norwood, I would be checking them out non-stop. They were so much fun. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're still in libraries, and there are probably other variants they've had. Of course, nowadays you can probably, I wonder if they have a Choose Your Own Adventures online book. I need to look that up because that would be pretty cool. But yeah, just, and of course you'd go through the story, and then you want to go again, and then you try to end up seeing if you could reach all possible conclusions, just, you know, until you got to turn the book back in. But another type of books was huge then, and of course the TV series would follow Goosebumps. I mean, what 90s kid didn't read Goosebumps? Even people that weren't horror fans read those. They were certainly kid friendly, but there was a lot of scary stuff in there. Like, the younger kids would probably get scared of them more than like me in third grade. It didn't scare me. I just really found him fascinating because if you see my bonus episode, top 50 horror movies, you know that's my thing, horror. But I cannot talk about Goosebumps without telling the Josh story. Okay, like I was talking about, I was in third grade here. By the time my brother Josh was in third grade, by the time he started Norwood View, I was actually in the middle school, so we never actually was in the same school at the same time. I think it would have been funny. But he was in third grade, and he loved Goosebumps, so he started stealing them from the library. Like, I don't know, you're going to tell me how, Josh, how you, like, because I can't remember. I don't think you checked them out and just didn't bring them back, because they wouldn't let you keep checking them out. I don't know how you snuck these things. I guess I'll get into my story next since I'm telling on Josh. But, see, the thing, I guess eventually they'd found out. Or something, or they were getting suspicious because he wanted to take these all back, and he had, I don't know how many, 15, 20, maybe more Goosebumps books that he stole. The only problem is I love Goosebumps books, so he brought them home for some dumbass reason I can't even remember. I wrote my name in them, okay? Like, I wanted them. So, anyway, whatever guilty conscience or what makes him take them back, he didn't realize I'd written my name in them. They all go back and they're like, why is this name in there? They definitely remember me from their school. Like, hasn't been here in a while. These weren't in here before. And they're like, wait a minute. They probably looked at the parents like, that's the same, because we don't have the same last names. Like, that's his brother Josh. He goes to school here. Busted. He got suspended. Oh, pretty sure he hated me for that forever. But I will be fair. I will tell the story about me, and I will preface. I don't think I've been to elementary school. I will preface this with saying that I do not condone this activity. But sometime, it's actually the year after this, in 4th grade, I was literally put in handcuffs for stealing wrestling magazines. Yes. I was that low that I was stealing wrestling magazines. From my favorite place too, UDF. I couldn't go there for years because I was so... For one, they probably wouldn't let me in. I'm surprised I don't have my picture on the wall still. I've been there since. But, actually they were pretty cool about it, and I was able to go back and get... Sunday morning I told about my routine before about, going there and getting the newspaper and getting breakfast. But they watched me for sure. But anyway, I would go in there and I would just... Of course, this is the days without cameras. I would sneak wrestling magazines. Usually the WCW magazine or the PWI. Sometimes I'd get WWF, but I wasn't into WWF at this time. But, yeah. Not smart. And I've done some dumb things. Okay? Like I said, this was 4th grade. I started in 3rd grade, so I'd been there for about a year. Maybe a year and a half at this point. The police put me in handcuffs. I pretend I don't know where I live because we just moved in. And I couldn't tell at the time if the police were buying it. I almost guarantee they weren't. So they took me to school and walked into the secretary's office. Like, we caught this kid stealing at UDF. He claims he doesn't know where he lives. And the secretary looks at me, who literally lived 4 houses from me. He's like, come on, she's like, come on, Jason, you know where you live. I was busted. I got in so much trouble. I probably got beat. I deserved every bit of it. But the sad thing is I didn't learn. I would later go on and I'm really telling it, 6th and 7th grade and do the same thing at Thriftway, which doesn't exist anymore. Please don't let the statute of limitations come out. Please let it be over. I would get them and I would have a system. I would like put them down my leg. I wore jeans at the time. And go through the checkout, buy a little thing of gum so it looked like I had a reason to be in there. Anyway, I say all this stuff I'm not trying to glorify it. It's just how stupid I was and how, like, bad it could have been. I could have went to freaking juvenile hall. I could have really, but if I was telling Josh the story, I had to tell mine. Like I said, not condoning that at all. It's only funny to me because of just how stupid I was and how really lucky I was I didn't get caught. But one more thing I want to say about books before we move on and talk about things other people will know about, is the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark trilogy. Those 3 books were obviously left a lasting impression. They made a movie recently. I didn't really care for it. They actually made a documentary on the whole book series, which is actually, I think, better than the movie. I think that's free on like different streaming things that are free. Can't remember the name of it, but that's a good documentary. But anyway, these books, the stories like were actually scary. They were like Goosebumps on steroids. They're just a collections of like folk tales and scary stories collected by Alvin Schwartz. And the stories didn't get you the illustrations. These illustrations were just like, and there was a whole debate and protest then, because some woman found them in some kid's kindergarten and she was throwing a fit and protesting and all this crap. But and they re-released the books later on with different illustrations, and there was a huge like, nobody was buying them, so they went back to the original illustrations. But that's one I actually have on, I got from the library on CD and copied to my computer. So like, they play all the time. I have them on my Halloween playlist, and I also just on my regular computer playlist. And sometimes I'll just sit in there and the Hearst song will come on, if you remember the Hearst song. Of course, Harold the Scarecrow is one of the most famous, but those are 3 books that were amazing, and I believe they came out in the 80s. I believe. Yeah, I don't think they're older than that. But they would have a bunch of rip-off scary books, which were pretty good to read too. But the original Scary Stories trilogy, if you ever can find any of them with the original illustrations, or maybe even the one that came out with 3 of them. I don't actually own the books. Like I said, I have it on audiobook, but I'd love to own the books someday. Original illustrations only. The other ones just sucked. But yeah, that's my experiences with books, and my experience with the law, which wouldn't be it. Well, I think I've already talked about skipping school and having to shovel elephant poop for my community service. But anyway, we're going to move on to Tales from the Crypt, one of my favorite things, as you can see. Oh, first, by the way, since I'm kind of all over the place here, Taco Bell's got its Decades menu out. I kept a couple, of course. Let me know if you guys would like to see a bonus episode just talking about some of my experiences in restaurants in the 90s. Some of the things that they don't have anymore, some of the restaurants they don't have anymore that have changed. Could be a bonus episode if you want to hear about that, and share your own memories if you want of different things you did at different restaurants. Maybe restaurants that nobody's heard of. I can talk about Skyline on here finally, my all-time favorite place. That's where I got this Bengals cup. Skyline chili. Anyway, I'm making some Skyline with Alfredo noodles tonight. Like, it's gonna be good. Anyway, I'm all over the freaking place. We ain't even, I don't know how, we're probably an hour in by the time I'm done rambling. But Tales from the Crypt, they're in between seasons. Season 4 had finished. And later this year, actually, the cartoon Tales from the Crypt Keeper will come out. But I just want to pick a few of my favorites from season 4 to talk about, since they weren't actually in a season. Normally, when I talk about Tales from the Crypt, I'll try to talk about the episodes that occurred that month. They were off at this time, but reruns were on HBO. This is before reruns in syndication, so the only time I was able to watch these was barely. I remember in Mount Carmel when we lived there, like, I have a distinct memory that I don't think ever happened, but I'd heard it and it freaked me out. I heard the Crypt Keeper, and I remember this was sometime, this might have been the year before, because it was around Christmas time, because it was around my birthday's 2 days before Christmas. But I remember the Crypt Keeper saying my name during like either a show or a commercial. And I know that couldn't have been the case, because I watched every single episode then and he said my name once in them. I don't know, maybe my mom had a neighbor doing it from outside to scare me. I don't know. But anyway, episode 1 might have been my favorite from the whole season. It was called None But the Lonely Heart. Tom Hanks directed it and had a small cameo in it. About this guy who uses this, back today you swipe right, I don't know what you swipe, I'm not dating anybody, but all these dating apps back in the 90s, you record on VHS tapes and for dating services. They literally had dating services that do this. You go in and record a message, and then whoever's, is part of the service will view the tapes and see who they want to date. Anyway, this guy used the service to find older women, of course, that you can guess. They mysteriously died and he inherited their fortunes. Well, this happened way too often, and let's just say they all got revenge from the grave for this. But that was probably my favorite one of this season. Another good one's episode 6, What's Cooking, with Christopher Reeve. This was, I think, one of the last things he was in before he was actually paralyzed. That horse riding accident. It's this restaurant's failing, and they're like, there's this couple that run it, and then this weird guy called Gaston that just like helps him out, and he's like, you could tell by looking at him something's not right with him. Anyway, he eventually ends up killing somebody, and it's called What's Cooking, so you can guess. They start getting this, because, well, I should say, the restaurant was weird because they were like serving like squid or like this weird stuff that like nobody was coming in for. But all of a sudden, Gaston just found these mysterious steaks, and wow, these are good, and they started serving them, and the guy kills the landlord of the place, and of course the owners don't even know at first, but then they find out. But Meatloaf was in that episode, not the food, the singer. Although he became Meatloaf, literally. But yeah, just another one where, guess who ends up getting cooked at the end? Gaston. The twist endings in Tales from the Crypt are legendary. But the other one I want to talk about is episode 7, The New Arrival. It was about this another big thing in the 90s, the radio psychologist, talk show type thing. Basically Frasier. If you've ever seen that show, I didn't really care for it, but anyway, he always gives this parenting advice, and this woman calls in about her daughter, and the woman's played by the Zelda Rubinstein, who's famous for Poltergeist. She's got this kid that won't listen. It turns out the kid's like some skeleton monster thing by the end, and turns out all these other psychologists tried to help, and their skeletons are in this room where they got this radio host, and he's about to join them. But just some great Tales from the Crypt episodes. Like I said, off season at that time, but it was February, so there was a lot of shows. Tales from the Crypt only ran like 3 or 4 months, but regular TV lineups were still going, and that's what I want to kind of talk about right now. Get me a drink of this. This Firework Faygo Pop. No, I'm not being sponsored. And again, I don't like the clown. I can't stand ICP. I will be talking about them at some point when I talk about wrestling later on. Not today. But that song, The Oddities they made, a specific memory. Actually, it has to do with Hardee's. I'll say that for the restaurant one. Anyway, boy, am I all over the place. I apologize to anybody that I just get off on a rant about something else. I'm talking about Tales from the Crypt. Now I'm talking about Hardee's. New Hardee's sucks. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about TGIF, because I added this to my things to talk about, because TGIF was certainly one of those times where the teenagers, if they didn't, teenagers and kids, if they didn't have plans on Friday nights, which sometimes you did, you would go watch. During this time, Family Matters was on TGIF. Family Matters was the big show on TGIF. They'd been in season 4. Eddie's friend Waldo, the freaking, because they had to add a second weirdo to the show, I guess. He joined the regular cast. He was funny. He wasn't the same type of weird nerd character as Steve. He was just the idiot. He was dumb. And Myra made her debut during this season. Of course, she'd be obsessed with Urkel, but Urkel didn't really want nothing to do with her, even though they did date. Of course, Urkel always loved Laura. But Step by Step was in season 2. Same creators as Family Matters. Sorry for the air conditioner. But in fact, in the second episode ever of Step by Step, they do a crossover where Urkel just randomly shows up on the show. But I mean, it was a good ploy because it got people watching him. Because I mean, Urkel was huge at this point, like everywhere. He did the Urkel dance on the episode, but so they basically used him to get viewers to it, and you know, I mean, it's a smart move because if, you know, second episode of a show, it's hard to get a show off the ground even in those days. You know, to build an audience, unless it's, you know, something that had been hyped up really well. So they used Urkel to get views, and going to the second season, they were going pretty well. During this time, they had a two-parter. A lot of shows do this where they go on vacation and it's like a two-parter because you can tell they're filming on locations. They went to Hawaii during the month of February. The third show of the night, because TGIF was usually 8 to 10, the third show of the night was Dinosaurs. Gotta talk about dinosaurs. If you've never seen this show, it's what it says. It's about dinosaurs, but it's a straight-up comedy. The family, the Sinclair family, the dad's a grouch that works all day. The mom, you know, is all at home taking care of the family. The teenage brother and sister, but the one everybody always remembers is the baby who didn't even have an. If it did get named, I can't remember if they mentioned it, but it was the baby was always referred to as Baby Sinclair, and the phrase that everybody knows, "Not the mama, not the mama." Everybody remembers that. He would take the frying pan and smack his dad on the head constantly. Like, the baby just was the star of that show. I mean, they had stories that didn't even really revolve around the baby, but if you didn't, it was like Tales from the Crypt. Without the Crypt Keeper, it would just be some interesting, you know, scary stories that were good, but without the Crypt Keeper, they wouldn't have become iconic. Dinosaurs wouldn't have become iconic without the baby. They were in season 3 at this point. Just great memories of that show. I actually had, that wasn't me, it was Travis that got it. The Baby Sinclair, I'm pretty sure it talked. Yeah, Travis wore the batteries out of that thing. I was jealous because I wanted it. But yeah, just love that show. And then the fourth show was Camp Wilder. I've never heard of. Again, this isn't really, I do a little bit of research, but I'm not giving histories of like everything. So if I only talk about things briefly or say, oh, I've never seen this moving on, it's not because I don't like the show or I don't think it deserves to be talked about. It's just this podcast is different. It's not a, like I said, it's not a history lesson. Even though it is a history. It's a brief history lesson. Let's just say that. It's my personal history lesson. That's even better. But as you see many times with movies, I'll get into movies in a little bit, but some weeks I go back and forth whether I want to talk about the Saturday morning cartoons or I want to talk about the Nickelodeon lineup. This week I decided to do Saturday morning cartoons. I did Nickelodeon last week. So we're going to jump into February 93. I don't look at this list ahead of time so I can give my reactions on the things. There might not be anything on here I've ever seen before. We're going to look at February 20th, 1993. And I actually hadn't written that down which one I was choosing. I just now chose it, so I better write it down so I can go back later on and look. Because, I add little pictures here. I don't add video because I don't want to deal with copyright stuff. I've had enough copyright issues. I don't want to put videos into this. I could, but, it's not worth the, put up a 30-second video and then all of a sudden I'm hit with a copyright strike. It's happened. I don't want to get off on a tangent about Facebook, YouTube and their stuff, because that's mainly where I get them from. But anyway, that's why I just put up pictures. Sorry if it's lame and old-fashioned, but anyway, we're going to get into this. We'll start with Fox here. Dog City, never heard of it. Bobby's World, 8:30, talked about this one before, I think on my first episode. Love Bobby's World, all those weird characters and his weird family. Howie Mandel, of course, based on his childhood experiences, just like Life with Louie later on. 9 o'clock, Tom and Jerry Kids. I remember this one, Tom and Jerry as kids. That was a theme with some cartoons. they'd be on forever, and then they'd have kid versions. Like they had the kids, like they had Pebbles and Bam Bam. Like almost, well, that's adults. I'm confusing things, but they had the Flintstone kids, and they've had the Looney Tune kids. Basically, what Tiny Toon Adventures would come into, because they had Looney Tunes as characters as kids, but then they also came out with Tiny Toon Adventures, which were not Looney Tunes as kids. But anyway, I'm confusing you. Jerry Kids, yeah, I remember watching this all the time. Eek the Cat. That was one I never really got into, but was a big one on Fox. Tiny Toon Adventures, just like I was talking about. Again, I wasn't trying to say Tiny Toon Adventures were like Bugs Bunny as a kid. It was Buster Bunny, obviously. But Tiny Toon Adventures was a crazy show. Oh, speaking of that, Tasmania. My wife's favorite Looney Tune character, Taz. I remember Tasmania. That theme song, Tasmania. I remember it being on, like before I'd watched Boy Meets World when I came home from school, before I discovered that show. I remember Tasmania being on in the afternoon. I always eat my bowl of cereal watching it. 11 o'clock, X-Men. Talked about that before. I love that cartoon, even though I could care less about superhero stuff. Even though I'm wearing a Superman shirt. Yeah, I loved X-Men. And then Super Dave, Daredevil for Hire. I remember a little bit about Super Dave. I don't think I've ever seen this cartoon. Okay, NBC, Saved by the Bell, of course. Classic with Screech and, you know, all that. I've talked about that before. After that was California Dreams, which I don't remember a lot about. I know it was another teen show. You can see themes on these things. Like, Fox went more for younger to maybe preteen kids and even teenagers later on with the X-Men. NBC was definitely catering to the teenagers in the morning with Saved by the Bell, then California Dreams, another Saved by the Bell. Name Your Adventure. I don't remember that one. We're going to do a first here. I'm going to Google something while we're doing this. Because I wonder if that's anything like Choose Your Own Adventure. Because that would be ironic. Name Your Adventure. It's probably not. Let's see what the old Googly machine has to say about it. It says a reality show for 3 seasons. If it really is a Choose Your Own Adventure thing, I'm going back and watching this. Teenagers who submitted their request to the program went on adventures of their choosing with one of 3 hosts. That definitely sounds interesting. If you've ever seen Name Your Adventure, let me know, because that sounds interesting. Thought it was going to be Che, and then from 11 to noon was NBA Inside Stuff, the All-Star Edition, because the NBA All-Star Game was going on at the time. All my other episodes, I've talked briefly about the NBA and NHL, just given like generic, like who is leading at the time, or if the finals was that month. But I'm gonna kind of stop doing that because it's not really authentic. Because like I said, I didn't watch it, so just talking about it like briefly, generically, just seems kind of inauthentic. If you want to learn about the NBA seasons at the time, or NHL, or anything else. You can look up stuff about that. I don't want to try to, waste time on here talking about something I don't have any clue about or didn't watch then. Like I said, the most I know about hockey is Wayne Gretzky, and the most I know about basketball is Michael Jordan and the Bulls in the 90's. Outside of March, when I watched to see if Ohio State last year didn't even make the tournament, but March Madness, that's the only time I watch basketball all year, and only Ohio State games. I don't even watch the championship if they're not in it, which they're normally not. But anyway, was that it? That's showing that's all that was it. I don't think they have the full set on here. Because, I know ABC and CBS had cartoons at the time. Well, that kind of sucked. Yeah, I should have looked at this. Like I said, I don't look at them beforehand because I like to give reactions, but this was kind of a short one. You're probably like, oh, good, this podcast ain't going to be 10 hours. We ain't going to have to hear about the latest version. I didn't even get my joke in about the Looney Tunes having their own different, like, Looney Tune, or was it Sylvester Mysteries, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Hound's dog's uncle. I don't know. This one kind of sucked. But yeah, they didn't even have a full lineup on this one. By the way, I get this off of one of those fandom things, so screw you, fandom. You suck this month. Sorry about that abrupt ending there. Moving on, we're going to talk about movies. Another thing that I sometimes talk about that I don't know half the movies, so instead of listing movies I don't have any clue about, I'm just going to talk briefly about the ones I do. Groundhog Day, I think I've seen once. Everybody seems to love that movie. It's kind of for me. Don't shoot me. Bill Murray, of course. You know, it's the classic story about, you know, his day starts over again. Falling Down, I'd seen once or twice. That's a real, like, creepy movie. It's about a guy that's just had enough of life, and he's just going on a freaking rampage. And the one I do have the most memories of is Homeward Bound: The Incredible Journey, which is weird because last week I talked about The Adventures of Milo and Otis and said how it's kind of like Homeward Bound. And like I said, I randomly picked these dates. I had no idea I'd be talking about Howard. Who's Howard? I don't know. Homeward Bound: The Incredible Journey. Again, another one with animals journeying across the country. I say that and all my dogs run out. You guys ain't going on no Homeward Bound adventure. Anyway, we'll be talking about now. We be talking now. Talk about the primetime TV schedule. Just some highlights of it, not the whole thing. Just of some shows that I haven't talked about. Because I try to talk about shows that I haven't talked about before. I know eventually I'm going to have to repeat. And I'll go into more details of stuff. Like I was trying to do a TGIF. I was trying to give what seasons they were in. But primetime TV schedule for February. Married with Children. What can I say about this series? I have it all on DVD. This is the most hilarious, politically incorrect show ever be, I think. Outside of some of the stuff from the 70s, like All in the Family and Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons. This was Fox's big show. That along with The Simpsons, that really put them on the map. Because you got to realize that back in the early 90s, I think by this time they had gone full-time, but Fox wasn't even a full-time network. Like their channels would have stuff on all day, but it would all be syndication. Like they didn't even have every night of the week originally. They would just have a couple days. I think it originally started with like Saturday and Sunday, or maybe just Sunday. But Sunday night I remember was Married with Children. And that and The Simpsons, like I said, really put them on the map. And now Fox is, you know, just like NBC, ABC, and CBS. It's, you know, one of the big four networks. But back then, it was struggling to get on the air everywhere. And Married with Children was definitely a big help. But this season was kind of when it was like, because I'm part of many groups on Facebook, nostalgia groups, Married with Children group, which I haven't seen anything posted in a while. I think the group kind of died. But season 7 is always talked about as being the worst because it had the character known as Seven. Their nephew, I can't remember from, I think it was their nephew, one of their nephews, I think Pegs, came to live with them, with this little kid. And it's just like, a little kid doesn't belong on this show where they're making all these raunchy adult jokes. It felt just kind of strange, and just the stories with him in it, just a bad taste. And then he mysteriously disappeared after that season. Good. And then they went on to have 3 more seasons after this. But yeah, even so, I guarantee it was bringing in more ratings than most shows on Fox. Hanging with Mr. Cooper, ABC, they were on their first season. I don't have a ton of memories about this. I remember watching it a lot in syndication. It was about this former NBA coach that went to work at school as a gym teacher. I can't remember why. He might have got injured or something, but I just remember that a lot. Because NBA was, like I said, I didn't really watch it then. I'd heard about the Bulls and stuff, but like it was like that was when it became like a huge pop culture thing, not just it's big in sports. Because like I said, thanks to Michael Jordan, basically, he made the NBA what it is today. I don't care what anybody says. I'm not saying there wasn't good players before him or good games before him. I'm just saying pop culture wise. CBS, Rescue 911. I talked about Unsolved Mysteries last week. Rescue 911 and Unsolved Mysteries were usually, sometimes they were back to back. At this time, it was just Rescue 911. I remember that shit. That theme song, like, it almost scared me because I don't know why. Like, just the whole sound of the theme song was kind of scary. Like reenactments, of course, as a kid, I thought they were like actual videos of these things, but just 911 calls, and it was a great show. You learned a lot about rescue, and I guarantee there's more than a few people that saw that show and ended up becoming paramedics or even working at 911 call centers. Because you got to remember another thing, 911, it wasn't always a thing. It was during my life, but back in the older days, you couldn't just call 911 to get the police. I mean, 911 was instituted everywhere, and it's a great thing, and I can't say enough about that show. I learned so much about it. That and Unsolved Mysteries, and then later on Fox, America's Most Wanted, and Cops. Those four shows really were huge in the 90s, and I think they could be brought back and still be just as popular today. Coach, ABC, they were in season 5. Of course, Coach was Hayden Fox, played by Craig T. Nelson. I love that show. That show was so hilarious. The idiot Dauber, and I can't remember the assistant coach, but he was an idiot, and Coach Fox was an idiot half the time too. About the only sane, smart one on this show was his wife. But he was a coach of a college football team, and last couple seasons he actually coached an NFL team. But yeah, randomly I have only season 2 of that on DVD. I need to get the whole set. One I'd probably never be able to afford to get the whole set is Law and Order. They were in season 3 on NBC. Back at a time when the only Law and Order was Law and Order. I mean, now you got Law and Order, which actually came back. It went away, and is actually back. I need to catch up on those, by the way. But of course, the most popular one, and probably my favorite one, and a lot of people's favorites, is Law and Order SVU. That one's became probably the best known. They've had Criminal Intent. I couldn't stand that. That one detective, all he does is talk. Like blah blah blah. He talks more than me. But then I think there's an organized crime one. But back in this time, it was just Law and Order. They were on season 3, and still finding their feet, but becoming a big series. And of course, now Law and Order's on that Thursday 10 o'clock. Well, I think they're on at 9 and 10, but that Thursday time slot known as Must See TV. So Law and Order just always been huge since the early 90s. Another thing that was on in prime time that would eventually go on to Saturday morning cartoons on Fox was Batman the Animated Series. Now I've talked about this before, but this was the year it came out. They were in their first season, and I was surprised to learn they only lasted 2 seasons, but each season was like almost a whole year worth of episodes. So they had over 80 episodes, and of course they'd go on in syndication later on. But yeah, since it was a cartoon, it wasn't like a series where you have like the basic 22 episodes. If I can get a little sidebar, I hate newer series that will come out, like especially the streaming only ones, where there'll just be 10 episodes in the season. That's it, 10 episodes. I like the days of the 22 episode seasons because you get, it builds up. But nowadays we got these series that'll last 10, and then they can't, like Netflix. What was it? I think it was called Santa Clarita. Was it Santa Clarita Diet or something? Anyway, it was a show about zombies. It was hilarious. It was on Netflix, and they canceled it after the 3rd season without, leaving it on a cliffhanger. Where it starred Drew Barrymore. I'm really talking about the 90s here, huh? Drew Barrymore, about the only connection to the 90s this show has. But yet she bit her husband at the end of it because she, like, if the premise was she was a vampire, or not vampire, she was a zombie, but didn't even realize it at first. This show was absolutely hilarious. I'm thinking about going back and watching it again. Anyway, it ended in a cliffhanger, and it was a Netflix show. But I read something about Netflix only likes to have original shows, except for their Stranger Things, which I do not like. I know that's probably surprising to some that I don't like that, but I cannot stand that show. It's like they're trying too hard to be retro, to where it's not retro to me. Anyway, you'd think Netflix would let their things continue. Back in these days, shows would, they'd let them continue. Like I was talking about ER, I'm watching, I've talked about that a couple times before. I'm on near the end of season 13 of ER. Shows ain't gonna go that long these days. They drop one little point in the ratings and they're gone. And TV ratings don't even matter anymore. Because I've talked about this before. Back in the old days, TV ratings were everything. Nowadays, you can't rely on TV ratings because how many people actually sit down at the actual times that these shows come on networks and watch them? It don't happen as much anymore. You either watching it on DVR or TiVo. Is that still a thing? I don't know what it is, but DVR is always what I had when I had cable. A lot of people don't have cable. They'll watch them on streaming and they have to wait till the next day unless they have, I think Peacock and Paramount Plus have the, I'm not even getting into Hulu. Them and their ads suck, and their huge Hulu live TV price sucks. And I'm looking over at my TV and yelling at it like it's its fault. But, yeah, people are watching next day streaming or later on, or they'll wait to binge watch because they don't want to wait week to week like we had to in the old days. That was another thing. In the old days, you had to wait a week. If it was a cliffhanger, you were just holding on, waiting, hoping that it was on next week, hoping you didn't have plans or something didn't stop you from watching it. It's not like you could go back and watch it the next day. Unless you had a VCR and were taping things, you watched it live. But, yeah, that was just a different time. I want to move talking about the news. The last couple podcasts, I haven't really had much in the news. There's a lot going on in the news at this time, and as is with news, it's not normally, fun stuff. I like to have a lot of fun here on the podcast and talk about crazy stories and stuff, but there's nothing funny about these two stories. The civil trial of the 4 officers who assaulted Rodney King, the civil trial just started. Of course, the year before, the 92 summer LA riots were because the officers were actually acquitted of criminal charges, because even though this was recorded, it was seen by everybody. These were clearly racist officers who use excessive force is not even strong enough word. They went beyond over the line and they were acquitted. So those riots in LA broke out, and that was a huge divisive point. And I didn't actually at this time even remember hearing much about it. It's not like I wasn't watching the news and they didn't talk about it much at school, which I think they should have. Just like the next thing, I didn't hear much about it at the time. Of course, at the time I was 9, so a lot of world events that happened at this time, I may have heard about it, and I may have heard more than I even remember, but I don't actually remember it. But yeah, that trial ended up being awarded $3.8 million. But I mean, it's not like it made his life better and everything was better. He ended up not having a very good life. I think he said he drowned in 2012 or something and was poor. How do you get poor after $3.8 million? Well, I'm sure you can lose $3.8 million as quick as you can lose like $200, just depending on what's going on. And like I said, he did not have there a lot of things went wrong with that, and just going back and looking at the case and stuff, those officers should have been convicted of crimes. They should have been put in prison. But and they weren't, and the riots happened, and I can't say I agree with rioting at all. Two wrongs don't make a right, but it was a horrible tragedy that should have never happened. And I don't want to get all political on all the cop things and defund this, and I try not to get political on here, but this stuff still happens today, and it's absolutely horrible. And hopefully someday we live in a world where ideally we live in a world with no crime, but hopefully we live in a world where police can fully be trusted, because there are a lot of good police officers out there that do their jobs well and are fair, but it's ones like this that give the whole police force a bad name. And like I said, I'm not attacking police officers. I'm not, police officers never do wrong. I try to, my opinion's in the middle. If a police officer's doing something wrong, they need to be off the force, and if it's criminal, they need to be in jail. If they're doing right, then good for them. They're just doing a lot of people commit crimes, like a lot of people steal to feed their family, and I'm not saying right or wrong there. I told before about getting arrested for the wrestling magazine, and I completely deserved that. I'm not saying, the police shouldn't have done that. I was just a kid. I knew what I was doing. I was stealing. It was wrong. That's why, not to get off on another tangent, but so many people let kids get a pass with, they don't know right from wrong, they're too young. I was in 3rd grade, or 4th grade, I can't remember, one of the two, but that don't matter. But I knew that it was wrong, because if I didn't know it was wrong, why was I sneaking it out? Why didn't I just walk in? I can take this. And I actually deserved more punishment than I got. All I got was taken to school in handcuffs, and I think I got, detention or something at school, and of course I got in trouble at home. But, kids know wrong from right more than you think they do. If there's a gray area where you're not sure, of course. But, and I'm not saying, a kid steals something from the store, so, throw him in prison or something. I'm just saying there's a lot of, how did I even get on this subject? I was talking about the Rodney King thing, and I'm not trying to laugh about that, I promise. And then I get into, I don't know how I got into that. We get off on tangents here, like I said, but that was a horrible time. And then, talking about a horrible time, if I say to you the World Trade Center, you're automatically going to think 9/11. But this was actually the what's known as the forgotten bombing of 1993, which is not forgotten by everybody, but nowadays you say World Trade Center to kids, and they're not going to think that there was a bombing in 1993. But yeah, a bombing killed 6 people and injured over 1,000. The Al Qaeda people, whoever they sent in, drove a truck into the parking garage under the World Trade Center, and their idiot plan was to blow up the one and topple the other one. It didn't work because they're freaking idiots over there. I can't stand. Sorry, I'm getting off on rants on that. But yeah, they definitely did a lot of damage, and they rebuilt it, and then same idiot group was responsible for 9/11, and people wonder why we went after them. I know that's a whole thing. And if anybody goes, George Bush did it, or government, shut up. Just right now, shut up. It was not a government cover-up. There wasn't using trick magic cameras and stock footage of something getting blown up. It was just some of the theories I've heard about that really pissed me off because of the amount of people that died. I know we're talking about 93, and I'm not trying to skip over that. But the same with, but it's really, a lot of people died in that. Thousands of people. And the people that went in to rescue them, even if they were safe, there were so many that had lung disease that ended up dying of lung cancer and other kind of diseases because of the asbestos and the lead and everything else in those buildings, and they didn't have enough protection. Like, all that to happen, and for people to, George Bush was trying to cut, this Federal Trade Commission report or stock exchange report or something was going to come out the next day or that day that said that this happened, so the government wanted to do something else. To shut up already. Like, I'm so tired of the people turning this tragedy into their stupid conspiracy theories. Sorry, I don't normally get upset on this one, but just thinking about that really did. And I'm not trying to gloss over this. This was horrible in itself in '93, and could have been a lot worse. And then, I mean, what was it? 8 years later, was a lot worse. You know, I knew talking about the news this week was going to be kind of hard, and it was. You know, a lot of things going on that I didn't realize. And see, that's when I look back on retro times. I don't think of things like this because my mind doesn't go there, because I guess my mind always kind of goes to humor. Like, anything bad happened to me, yeah, I remember it, and if I really get to start thinking about it deep, it affects me. But I turn everything into humor, and I know some people may think that's not healthy, but I mean, what would be healthy? Sitting there talking about it with somebody for an hour every week? And a lot of people do that, and that's completely fine if they need to do that. I'm not crapping on therapy. Therapy is truly great. But I'm saying for me, like, I'm not sitting here making jokes about it and then in my head, I'm so sad. Like, if I'm making jokes about it, I really am laughing about it. I really, I try to turn stuff into humor. I'm obviously not going to turn these news events into any humor, because no humor to be found there. But I'm getting kind of off topic on everything. My point of my podcast is to give, stuff that happened then. That's why I give the news. I don't want to just leave it out. Certain things that happen you can't gloss over. But sorry for the rambling and ranting, and not sorry for my stance on the stupid conspiracy theories. You idiots are just dumb. Stop watching my podcast right now. Unsubscribe, unfriend me, whatever, if you think George Bush did 9/11. Same freaking... anyway, we're going to move on to wrestling. As I said, huge WCW fan. There was no WWF news during this time. Need another drink. I'm rambling too much, that's how I know. But I guess the biggest news in the WWF is Monday Night Raw had just debuted the month before. And of course, we know how huge Monday Night Raw is still going on. It's about to debut on Netflix. Hopefully no buffer like that Mike Tyson fight did. Anyway, a lot of WCW news. During this month was WCW Super Brawl 3. That was on February 21st from Asheville, North Carolina. And just a few of the things that were happening there. Barry Windham would defeat the Great Muta for the NWA World Title. And during this time, it was kind of a strange time, because they'd start calling themselves WCW, and I guess there was a split from the NWA as far as like with the championships, because like I said, Great Muta was NWA World Champion to Barry Windham. Barry Windham defeated him, if I can talk. But also at the time, Vader was the WCW World Champion. So they had two World Champions. They would eventually merge those, and then the NWA would just randomly create their own. Like, we got a world title again. But I mean, I guess to their credit, I mean, they did own their own world title. WCW wanted to combine them. I don't think they officially recognized, going forward, there was a split. The NWA. It was after that time the NWA stopped with WCW, sometime around, not exactly here, but yeah, it was like, if I watch it today, watching then, I didn't really know the history of the NWA or the WCW. I was just watching it. But if I were looking at it like today, through today's lens, if it happened today, I'd be like, why is there two world champions, and which one's better? And of course, I always loved the look of the NWA world title better than WCW's. So, but anyway, Ric Flair made his return to the WCW at this time. He'd been gone for 2 months. That whole debacle with Pizza Boy Jim Herd running WCW, running off Ric Flair. But he made his return to the company after 2 years. Of course, speaking of Monday Night Raw, I think it was was it the first episode? Either the first or the second episode, he lost the Loser Leaves WWF match against Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect. But yeah, he would make his return, and he'd be there till the company closed. And making his debut that night was at Super Bowl 3. Super Bowl. I don't even know. Lex Luger pro. Super Bowl Saturday. Your shirt's too tight, Billy. Look up the Lex Luger Super Bowl promo. I think it's hilarious. But Davey Boy Smith made his debut. Of course, the British Bulldog, as he was known in WWF. This is actually where I first seen Davey Boy Smith, and he did a lot in WCW the early days. He could have done a lot better in there and WWF. I wish he would have gone further. And then, of course, he had that horrible back injury in WCW when he came back there later on. That pretty much ended his career. I mean, he would wrestle a little bit after, but he wasn't the same. Huge changes in WCW during this time. Eric Bischoff, this was his first show as executive producer. Bill Watts had resigned before this show, and then probably because of loyalty to Bill Watts and because he didn't want to work under Eric Bischoff, Jim Ross would quit 4 days after this pay-per-view. And of course, for his better and the better of business altogether, he went to WWF because him and Jerry Lawler were probably one of the most iconic commentary duos. I was going to say the most, but then you got Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura. So I can't say they were the greatest of all time. They were certainly the greatest of that era. The main event of this show was the unsanctioned White Castle of Fear match. I remember watching the build up to this, where they go into this castle with Harley Race, and Harley Race was Vader's manager. The White Castle of Fear. Of course, I heard White Castle. I was like, what are they gonna have? How many of those are they gonna eat? I wonder how many freaking White Castles. If you know what White Castles are, if you're from the South and don't know what White Castle is, I think the equivalent is Crystals. I think it's not the same restaurant, but it's like an equivalent. The little sliders, as they're called. Everywhere has sliders now. But I was wondering how many White Castles Vader could eat. Anyway, that has nothing to do with anything. Vader, because I remember the promos, they would have this, it was a leather strap match they were going to have, and they had to strap over this fire, and the fire burned the strap, and WCW put on these mini movies, and they're so cheesy these days. But it actually, I wanted to watch this. Of course, I never got to watch the pay-per-view. I was just watching WCW Saturday Night and their syndicated shows then. But kind of some sad news around this time. February 18th, Kerry Von Erich took his own life, and of course, the world now knows about. Even if you weren't wrestling fans, people were watching the Iron Claw movie. Can't say enough about the tragedy of that family, but yeah, Kerry Von Erich took his own life February 18th of this year. But we'll move quickly into sports now. Sorry I'm going on forever. It was actually the day before this, the NFL season ended at Super Bowl 27. And during this month, they had the Pro Bowl. They used to have the Pro Bowl the week, after the Super Bowl. Then they moved it to the week before the Super Bowl. But then a lot of players weren't, because football is a dangerous game, and a Pro Bowl was just like an exhibition. But they're playing full, so they've changed the Pro Bowl over the years. Nowadays, it's more of like this competition thing, and a lot of people don't like it. I actually do. It's kind of something different, You have different competitions, and it's because they're not players. Football is a tough game, like I said. Players aren't going to go out there and risk getting an injury that could take them out, for a good part of the next season on a game that means nothing other than getting paid. And I know that sounds like like they're arrogant athletes, but I mean, really, if you're playing football, you're working towards winning a Super Bowl. You're working, if you're not doing it for something that means something, you're not gonna give it your all, and really, it would suck to see people injured that way. But anyway, the Super Bowl 27, like I said, was January 31st. It was actually the last Super Bowl to be held at a non-NFL stadium. It was held at the Rose Bowl in California. But the Cowboys blew the Bills out 52-17 to win their third Super Bowl. And NASCAR had just started because, of course, they start in February. Dale Jarrett won the Daytona 500, and Rusty Wallace won the GM Goodwrench 500 at North Carolina Speedway. But we're going to talk about video games now. Of course, I talked about the console wars. Talk a little bit about the let's see, Star Fox was released for Super Nintendo. Of course, Star Fox 64 was one of those iconic Nintendo 64 games. But Star Fox was actually the first game to use Super Nintendo's Super FX chip. And it was also known as having one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. Full disclosure, I've never played the game. But I figure I should definitely talk about that because there's probably a lot of people out there that have a lot of memories of that. And not video game related, but Magic the Gathering was first released February of '93. And of course, I never played any of those games. Those are Pokemon or any of the other ones. But there's a lot of people that love those card games. And that's when it all started. But I'll talk a little bit about the best-selling games. Tecmo Super Bowl for NES, regular Nintendo, as I call it. A lot of people call it NES, I'm just calling it Nintendo. I call it regular Nintendo. Tecmo Super Bowl was like that classic football game that they released. They released it for the Nintendo. Of course, the Nintendo was still supported because they still sold games for it, but it was clearly on the outs because the number one game for Super Nintendo was another football game. It was John Madden Football 93. And people today, of course, know Madden as the football game. My favorite football series of all time was the 2K series. Started on Sega Dreamcast. And my all-time favorite football game of all time was NFL 2K5 on Xbox because you could have your music playing in the background, and you had your own locker room. You could play like pool. You could play paper football. You could change pictures, and the gameplay on that game. That was the last year the 2K anybody was able to do an NFL game. Before EA signed that exclusive deal, and a lot of people said that Madden's become lazy because of it. They haven't really tried to innovate too much, and it's just basically re-releasing the same game with new players. I haven't played any of the newer ones, so I wouldn't know. The newest Madden I have is 18 for PS4, which is fun. But this was actually, speaking of that, this was actually the last Madden game to not be endorsed by the NFL, which sounds strange today. How would you have a Madden game without the NFL involvement? Well, they did. They just had generic made-up teams instead of NFL teams. The dogs don't like that. What did you want to play as the Oilers? I always talk about the Oilers just because they don't exist anymore. I miss that team, even though they beat us a lot. But yeah, it's so strange to think about. There was a time when Madden didn't have NFL involvement, but there it is, and that was the last year, '94. Of course, they would start using the NFL teams, and because of that, they didn't have NFL involvement. It allowed them to re-release Madden '93. Like on Nintendo 64 and some of the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy DS and stuff like that. Because it didn't have the NFL stuff, they didn't have to deal with the rights. Anyway, the number one game for Sega Genesis was Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Classic game. Sega CD had been out, which was one of their first attempts to upgrade the Genesis. And the number one game for that was Cobra Command, which was a 1984 game. It has nothing to do with G.I. J. Who's G.I. J? G.I. Joe Cobra Commander. It was a 1984 game that they ported to Sega CD. You can tell they weren't putting much into Sega CD. Game Boy's #1 game was Super Mario Land 2. Never played that. And then the #1 game for Sega Game Gear, which was their handheld, which never became popular as Game Boy, but it looked really cool. I heard it ate batteries like crazy though. But the #1 game for that is Columns. It was like a tile matching game, sort of like Tetris. There was a million of those that came out. But yeah, a lot going on there in the video game world. Still support for Nintendo, but as you can see, barely for regular Nintendo. But we're going to end this week talking about music. The Billboard Hot 100. And the song at this time was #1 through the whole month. And really became #1 beginning of January, and ended up going 9 straight weeks, was Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. I mean, that, one of the biggest songs of all time, of course, written by Dolly Parton in the 70s. Actually, my favorite version of this was the duet Vince Gill did with Dolly Parton. That was my favorite version of this, but I mean, I didn't like pop music, and I knew about that song. I mean, that was like the definitive Whitney Houston song, at least to me. I mean, I'm not a fan per se of her. There's probably others that say, oh no, this song is better, but I mean, that was off, I think, The Bodyguard, the movie she was on, the soundtrack. I mean, that song, I didn't listen to pop or rock or anything besides country at that time, and I knew a lot about it, so that shows you how big that song was into pop culture. But like I said, I was listening to country, an American Country Countdown with Bob Kingsley. Man, I love listening to that on Sunday mornings. I'd get up at 9 and it'd play till noon. I'd be listening the whole time. But #1 to start the month was Doug Stone, Too Busy Being in Love. Man, he had a great voice. Another one of those from the 90s that I wish could have just gone on and on. Can't say enough about his voice. And then song that spent 2 weeks at #1, Travis Tritt, Can I Trust You With My Heart? Great ballad. Travis, he released these 2 albums later on called The Lovin' Side and The Rockin' Side, and that's him. He can he can play some of those rockin' songs that you wonder how they got played on country. There's so much guitar and they're so fast, but they were so good. But then he would sing a ballad, and you wouldn't think with his voice and personality and everything that he'd be a ballad, but man, he could pull off a ballad. I've seen him twice. I actually seen him this past summer in concert in Brownstown. But I also seen him down in Vevey at the Swiss Wine Festival 2017, I think. Both great shows, and both different shows too. It's the first time I'd ever seen someone twice in concert, and I wasn't knowing what to expect. Maybe he'll just do the same stuff, but he actually did. It was 2 completely different shows, but great shows. But the last song of the month that was #1, which would actually have another week in #1 in March, would be Lori Morgan, What Part I Know. That was a great song. Of course, Lori famously was married to Keith Whitley, and also she was either married to Sammy Kershaw or they were dating for a long period of time. I can't remember, but man, she had a great voice. Daughter of Grand Ole Opry star George Morgan. She had, during this early 90s period was, after her husband Keith Whitley tragically passed away of alcohol poisoning, I don't know how she was able to keep going, but she didn't have her career wasn't based on her husband dying. It was, like most country was in those days, based on the music. Great lyrics, great sound, great recordings, great live performances, and these 3 #1s in there proved it. But of course, they were all trumped by the Whitney Houston mega song. That was just, you have a list of top 100 songs of the 90s, that one's probably going to be in the top 10, if not #1 even. I don't know. I don't know enough about 90s pop music to make my own list. But yeah, music was definitely huge for me. Like I said, country music all the way until the late 90s. But we'll see, we've reached the end of the podcast here. Sorry if I've rambled forever. This is a fun one to record, as they always are. I never thought I would be like doing these podcasts, or that it would continue this long, but I'm having fun doing it. Hopefully you guys are having fun watching. Again, I want feedback. I can't get enough feedback because I want to try to make this better. If I'm rambling too much, or if, you know, maybe I need to do more research or do less research, or add a different category, or don't talk about this so much, you know, let me know what your personal preferences are. I love talking about my personal memories that me and only a few people would know. I love talking about some of the bigger things going on in the country. You know, I'm not going into all the world stuff because I definitely wasn't watching world news then. But just thank you all for watching. Next week we're going to go ahead, by a year and a couple months, we're going to go to April 1994, see what was going on then. And just like I said, keep leaving the feedback. Hope you enjoy this here on Facebook, YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Tales from the 90s never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars.